Have you ever been absolutely certain about something, only to realize later you had been completely wrong? Not because someone lied to you, but because you were lying to yourself. Most of us believe self-deception is rare. We imagine it belongs to dishonest people or to those unwilling to face reality. But psychology suggests something far more unsettling. Self-deception is not the exception. It is one of the mind's most ordinary habits. We all create stories about who we are, why we make certain choices, why relationships end, why opportunities disappear, why we stay, why we leave. And most of the time, those stories feel completely true. That is what makes them so powerful. More than a century ago, Carl Jung proposed a remarkable idea. He believed that much of what guides our lives operates outside conscious awareness. The unconscious doesn't simply hide forgotten memories. It quietly shapes how we interpret the world, how we judge other people, and perhaps, most importantly, how we see ourselves. Modern psychology reaches a similar conclusion through different theories. Research on cognitive biases, motivated reasoning, and self-serving bias suggests that the human mind often distorts reality, not to deceive others but to protect its own sense of identity. In other words, the greatest lie you tell yourself may not sound like a lie at all. It may sound like common sense, like certainty, like the story you've repeated for so long that you've stopped questioning it. In this video, we'll explore why self-deception is a natural part of the human mind, how Carl Jung believed the unconscious protects the ego, where modern psychology agrees and disagrees with his ideas, why seeing ourselves clearly is far more difficult than we imagine, and why the truth that changes your life is often the truth you've spent the longest trying not to see. Imagine watching a movie where the main character misunderstands everything happening around them. You can clearly see the clues. The truth is obvious, yet they keep making the same mistakes because they believe a story that isn't true. From the outside, their blindness seems almost impossible to understand. But Carl Jung believes something unsettling. We are often that character. The difference is, we don't realize we're inside the story. Most people think self-deception means deliberately refusing to face reality, pretending a problem doesn't exist, ignoring obvious facts. Jung meant something much deeper. He believed self-deception usually happens without conscious intention. It isn't something we choose, it's something the unconscious quietly creates, not to destroy us, but to protect us. Imagine wearing a pair of glasses you've had since childhood. Year after year, the lenses become part of your experience. Eventually, you stop noticing the glasses altogether. You simply assume you're seeing reality exactly as it is. Jung believed the unconscious can work in much the same way. It doesn't only influence what we remember. It influences what we notice, what we ignore, and the meaning we give to everything we experience. Modern psychology describes similar processes through cognitive biases. Researchers have identified dozens of predictable mental shortcuts that help the brain process information quickly. Most of the time, these shortcuts are useful, but they also make us more likely to interpret reality in ways that protect our existing beliefs. We notice evidence that supports our conclusions. We overlook information that challenges them. And because this happens automatically, our conclusions still feel objective. That is why self-deception is so convincing. If you knowingly believe something false, it wouldn't be self-deception, it would simply be lying. Self-deception feels different. It feels like certainty, like common sense, like reality itself. Jung believed this is one of the greatest challenges of psychological growth. The unconscious doesn't announce itself. It speaks through assumptions, habits, automatic reactions, and the stories we never think to question, which raises an uncomfortable possibility. If some of your deepest beliefs about yourself feel unquestionably true, how can you know whether they are actually true or simply familiar? To answer that question, we first need to understand why the mind becomes so invested in protecting certain beliefs, even when those beliefs quietly keep us trapped. If self-deception happens so naturally, why does the mind create it in the first place? Why would we ever distort reality instead of simply seeing it as it is? Carl Jung believed the answer begins with one of the most familiar parts of the psyche, the ego. Today, the word ego is often used to describe arrogance or excessive pride, but Jung meant something different. For him, the ego was the center of conscious awareness, the part of the mind that experiences itself as I. It organizes our memories, our decisions, our goals, and the story we tell ourselves about who we are. Without the ego, everyday life would become impossible. We couldn't maintain a stable identity or make consistent choices. The ego is not the enemy, but it has one powerful tendency. It wants its story to remain consistent. Imagine spending years believing that you're always generous, always rational, always honest. Then one day, you do something that doesn't fit that image. Perhaps you act out of jealousy, avoid responsibility, or hurt someone you care about. In that moment, the mind faces a difficult choice. It can change its picture of itself, or it can change the explanation. According to Jung, we often choose the explanation, not consciously, but automatically. Modern psychology describes similar processes. Researchers have found that people naturally explain successes and failures in ways that protect their self-image. Success is often attributed to our abilities. Failure is more likely to be explained by circumstances, bad luck, or the behavior of other people. This tendency is known as the self-serving bias. Another well-studied process is motivated reasoning. Instead of evaluating evidence completely objectively, we often begin with the conclusion we want to believe, and then search for reasons that support it. Most of us don't notice this happening because the reasoning feels perfectly logical. Jung believed this is precisely what makes self-deception so difficult to recognize. The unconscious doesn't force us to believe obvious falsehoods. It quietly edits the story, just enough to protect the identity we've already built. The result is a version of reality that feels internally consistent, even when it isn't entirely accurate. But if the ego works so hard to preserve its story, what kinds of stories does it protect most fiercely? The answer is often surprisingly ordinary. They're the stories we repeat every day, without ever realizing they're shaping our lives. If the mind works so hard to protect its picture of who we are, what kind of stories does it create? Most of them don't sound dramatic. In fact, they usually sound completely reasonable. I'm just waiting for the right time. I'm not ready yet. People are always against me. I could do it if I really wanted to. This is simply who I am. Perhaps each of these statements is true. But Carl Jung believed something important. The question is not whether a story contains truth. The question is whether it contains the whole truth. Imagine someone who dreams of changing careers. Year after year, they explain why now isn't the right moment. The economy isn't stable. They need more experience. They'll start next year. Some of these reasons may be perfectly valid. But eventually, another possibility begins to emerge. Perhaps the greatest obstacle is no longer the situation, and perhaps it is the story. Jung believed the unconscious often protects us from uncomfortable emotions by offering explanations that feel safer than the truth. Not because it wants to deceive us, but because certainty is often less frightening than uncertainty. Modern psychology describes similar patterns. Researchers have found that people naturally create coherent narratives to explain their choices and experiences. These personal narratives help us maintain a stable sense of identity. but they can also become surprisingly resistant to change, even when new evidence appears. Once a story becomes part of who we believe we are, questioning that story can feel like questioning ourselves. That is why self-deception rarely feels dishonest. It feels familiar. Think about someone who repeatedly says, "I always end up with the wrong people." At first, it sounds like a description of reality, but over time, it can quietly become an identity. The story no longer explains the pattern, it begins sustaining it. The same can happen with almost any belief. "I'm just not creative. I'm too old to change. People never appreciate me. Nothing ever works out for me." Jung believed these stories become powerful because they simplify a far more complicated reality. They protect us from questions that feel much harder to answer. What if I'm afraid of failing? What if I'm avoiding responsibility? What if I've become comfortable with the life I say I want to escape? These questions don't always lead to pleasant answers, but they often lead closer to the truth. And according to Jung, psychological growth rarely begins when we find better explanations. It begins when we become willing to question the explanations we've been living by. But if these stories protect us from uncomfortable truths, what exactly are they protecting us from? To answer that, we have to look at the part of ourselves that most often remains outside awareness. The shadow. If our stories protect us, what are they protecting us from? Carl Jung believed the answer often lies in the shadow, not because the shadow is evil, or because it's something we should fear, but because it contains the parts of ourselves we've never fully accepted. Many people imagine the shadow as anger, jealousy, or selfishness. Sometimes it is, but Jung believed it can also contain qualities we desperately need: confidence, ambition, honesty, the willingness to disappoint other people. Anything that doesn't fit the identity we've built can gradually fall outside conscious awareness. Now imagine someone who has spent their entire life believing, "I'm always the reasonable one." Every disagreement becomes proof that other people are irrational. Every failed relationship becomes someone else's fault. Every criticism feels unfair. Perhaps that story is sometimes true. But Jung would have asked a different question. What part of yourself becomes invisible if you never consider the possibility that you were wrong? This is where self-deception becomes so powerful. The stories we tell ourselves don't simply protect our self-esteem. They protect us from meeting the parts of ourselves we've spent years avoiding. Modern psychology describes something similar. Research suggests that people naturally avoid information that threatens important beliefs about themselves. This tendency is sometimes called defensive processing. When new information creates psychological discomfort, the mind often finds ways to reduce that discomfort, rather than immediately changing its beliefs. Jung described the same human experience through the language of the shadow. The unconscious doesn't hide uncomfortable truths because it enjoys deception. It hides them because they may feel emotionally overwhelming before we're ready to face them. That is why genuine self-awareness is rarely comfortable. Imagine walking through a magnificent ancient house you've lived in your entire life. For years, you've explored only the bright, familiar rooms. One day, you discover a door you've never opened before. The room behind it isn't filled with monsters. It's simply filled with everything you've ignored. Abilities you never trusted. Fears you never admitted. Regrets you never examined. Dreams you quietly abandoned. The room has always been there. Opening the door doesn't create it. It only allows you to see it. Jung believed the same is true of psychological growth. Awareness doesn't create the shadow. It reveals what was already influencing us from outside conscious awareness. And strangely enough, the moment we become willing to face those hidden parts, they often begin losing the power they held over us. Which leads to one final question. If seeing ourselves more honestly is possible, how do we actually begin? If self-deception is part of being human, does that mean we're trapped by it forever? Carl Jung didn't believe so, but he also didn't believe we could simply decide to become completely objective. The unconscious doesn't disappear because we recognize that it exists. It continues influencing us through habits, assumptions, and emotional reactions. The difference is we gradually become better at noticing it. For Jung, psychological growth was never about achieving perfection. It was about becoming more conscious, not because consciousness removes every illusion, but because it gives us the freedom to question them. Imagine standing in a vast ancient valley at sunrise. At first, a thick morning mist covers the landscape. You can still walk. You can still choose a direction. But your view remains limited. As the sun slowly rises, the mist doesn't disappear all at once. Little by little, more of the landscape becomes visible. Jung believes self-awareness develops in much the same way. There is rarely one dramatic moment when we suddenly understand ourselves completely. Instead, clarity grows gradually. Each honest question reveals a little more than we could see before. Modern psychology arrives at a similar conclusion. Research suggests that greater self-awareness is associated with better emotional regulation, greater psychological flexibility, and more accurate self-evaluation, not because people stop making mistakes, but because they become more willing to examine their own assumptions. Jung believed this willingness is one of the defining qualities of individuation. The goal isn't to replace one perfect story with another. It is to become less attached to every story the ego creates. Instead of immediately asking, "Is this true?" we begin asking, "Why does this explanation feel so convincing?" Instead of defending every belief, we become curious about it. Instead of protecting our identity at all costs, we allow it to grow. Perhaps this is the greatest difference between self-deception and self-awareness. Self-deception seeks certainty. Self-awareness tolerates uncertainty. It accepts that we may never see ourselves perfectly, and yet continues looking anyway. Because every illusion we recognize gives reality a little more room to enter. And perhaps that quiet willingness to keep questioning ourselves is the closest any of us comes to seeing who we truly are. Every one of us wants to believe that we see ourselves clearly, that our decisions are rational, that our explanations are accurate, that the story we tell ourselves is simply the truth. Carl Jung questioned that certainty. He believed the greatest illusions are rarely the ones we consciously invent. They are the ones we quietly inherit, repeat, and eventually mistake for reality. Whether or not every part of Jung's theory is correct, modern psychology points toward a remarkably similar conclusion. The human mind is not a perfectly objective observer. It constantly interprets, simplifies, protects, and reshapes experience, not because it is broken, but because that is how it has learned to survive. Perhaps that is why self-deception is so difficult to recognize. The stories that limit us rarely sound like lies. They sound like common sense, like certainty, like the voice we've been listening to for years. Jung believes psychological growth begins the moment we become willing to question that voice, not because every belief is false, but because every belief deserves the possibility of being examined. Perhaps true self-awareness is not reaching a point where we finally understand ourselves completely. Perhaps it is becoming curious enough to keep looking, to ask better questions, to tolerate uncomfortable answers, and to accept that every honest discovery makes us a little more conscious than we were before. Because the most dangerous lie you'll ever tell yourself is rarely the one you know is false. It's the one you've never thought to question. If you enjoyed this exploration of Carl Jung's ideas, subscribe to Hidden Patterns. In our next episode, will uncover another hidden pattern shaping the human mind. Until then, keep asking yourself one simple question. What if the story I'm most certain about is the one I understand the least?